Well, good afternoon, Scott Baker.
We are in agreement that it is a good afternoon, Mikey, and I guess that's a good thing if we're going to be talking about conflict. Conflict is the topic of the field note. And so the actual particular question that we're going to be dealing with here is team conflict. And is that a sign of health and not a sign of trouble? So,
Mm-hmm.
I think this one is a little bit easier said than done. I don't know what kind of you've encountered where like have you ever had a positive feeling in sort of a team sort of raucous conflict of viewpoints?
Well, I had the advantage of working in a camp situation where
Hmm.
we actually created conflict quite a bit
On
intentionally.
purpose. Yeah.
Right. So these team building exercises that we did, so
Right.
we trafficked in conflict a little bit in
Yeah,
order
but
to.
you that was just as a manipulative torture. That
Yes.
was you wearing the lab coat and doing terrible things to other human
Yes,
beings.
but because our
Right.
team had the tendency to create conflict in order to resolve it, we
Mm.
created conflict. We put some distance between the
Hmm.
participants and the ideas that we were talking about, and then we would, you know, talk about strategies to solve it intentionally. And so, because we had that language game that we always trafficked in, it
Okay.
it had the tendency to affect the way that our team operated as well. And so
Ah, okay.
we could talk through conflict with that language game in a more accessible way that, there might be a time or two where people felt like, you're just using that language, but you don't really mean it, right? But most of the time, I felt like our team was pretty good at working through conflict because of that.
Well, that's an interesting thing, and I have a question about it that I'm going to come back to. But
Mhm.
let's set this up as a bigger frame for those tuning in to watch or listen to Lead Better, because in the field note here, which is today 1667 here on the 2nd of January, and glad for anybody that is watching live right now, feel free to comment and jump right in. But and maybe you have a great story of team conflict that turned out great, or maybe you have a story of team conflict that turned out terribly. I've occasionally given the illustration of one time being in another country where I was working with a tech team, and I and the person I was with felt like very uncomfortable because there was a lot of shouting going on and a lot of just like really a huge emotion. And I actually at one point asked our host, "Should we step out?" And they were just totally confused. Like, what? What do you mean? And I said, "Well, it seems like this is kind of like an intense thing here." And they're like, "No, not no. This is." And I realized, oh, it's every day. This is just how they do it. They
Right.
yell at each other all day long, and
Right.
so that was totally normal for them. And I was like, oh, okay, well then it was fine. Now I don't know that I'd be okay, in a circumstance like that all the time. Although, as you know, I'm not a shrinking violet when it comes to disagreement. So
Right. I
with
don't
that,
think, yeah,
okay.
my guess is that like
Yeah,
your
you jumped in
real,
and said, yeah, pretty quickly there.
no, your real disagreement with what is perceived as conflict might be something else. Right. I think that I was doing a little bit of reading beforehand around the idea of conflict and zero sum aversion and how that they are
Okay.
intertwined, but not necessarily the same thing. So, zero sum being when I have a recognition that your winning means my losing. Like a situation is set up
Hmm.
in such a way that because you have won, I have therefore lost. And so there's a zero sum between us. And there is a strong aversion on this study that was done that most human beings have a tendency to evaluate situations based on whether or not they are, by their nature, zero sum or not. And
Mm.
if that zero sum, I think there is this notion that if it's a zero sum situation, there's going to be a lot of conflict in it. And so therefore I'm going to be averse to even dealing. And then it comes up in a lot of different ways. Like they did the study even with the idea of like, we're going to ask a bunch of MBAs to evaluate a compensation package for a job that they might be interested in. And if at the end of the year, the way that you're being compensated is a zero sum kind of a compensation
Like
package.
somebody got more and you didn't.
Right. Well, the,
Yeah.
the bonus pool is split up in such a way that someone could get an outsized version of the bonus pool versus it being just merit based and split
Hmm.
up evenly. Like if someone can overperform and therefore demand more of the bonus pool, and you're not going to be in there, and you actually have to, compete in a zero-sum situation. MBAs have said in the way that they need like $30,000 more per year in compensation to be willing to participate in a job like that.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Yeah.
There is so much aversion to zero sum. We're actually willing to pay to avoid it.
To avoid that, just to be
Right.
at that. Well, okay. So here's the question of the field note then is, can you, if you translate sums and all of these avoidances and everything else into the real world, can you have a team that actually leans in to the nature of conflict? And maybe that requires a little bit of a redefinition of what conflict means, but the idea that saying we're a culture that actually thrives on disagreement, and that, or maybe disagreement's not entirely the word, it's more of a candid view, I think is how the field note phrases it. So that if you were saying that we are not in a culture where you're afraid to raise an issue, and the very important point in this field note is that it talks about the nature of those who are actually sort of more powerful, more experienced, have higher positional authority. And if those people are privileged in the organization in a way that shuts down frank and open discussion and suggestion of ideas by others, well, then you have a problem. So if you have that situation, what do you do to get there, right? How do you do that in a way that then, if you have moments where they're fairly intense, how do you still build trust? How do you keep the camaraderie? How do you make this part of the fun, the co-conspiring of creating better ideas? And I think that goes to the zero-sum thing, which is it's not whether I'm going to win or lose the argument. It's in the clash of the polishing of the argument. Are we going to come up with a better argument? And do we show that over and over again so that when we go through that process, we lift that up, we celebrate the process as much as the outcome, right? So that we start to have an attraction, an addiction even to that kind of a process.
I think you're exactly right. And that's why I was so drawn to this particular study and kept on reading it, because it gets to not just team dynamics, but individual ones as well. Mm-hmm. It feels like in every conversation that I have where you and I disagree on specific ideas, that you are going to conduct the conversation in a way that you win and I lose, then I am not going to want to have those conversations with you. Mm-hmm. But you and I could have the exact same conversation and highly wrestle over the exact same ideas, but do it in a non-zero sum kind of a way where it actually feels like we're both winners as a result of it. And some people naturally talk that way, and other people naturally talk in this zero sum way, right? Like at the end of this, we're going to vote and everyone's going to get to know which one of us came across as the smartest sounding person on the podcast today. Like, let's actually go to Substack right now and actually have people type in their vote right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Which one of us
we know how they're going to vote. I mean, that's
no, we don't.
Clear. I don't want to.
It's so funny. Like even in my brain, like the conflict of like how
I trust everyone here. Yeah. These are very bright people.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I talk about it more in a zero sum kind of way, and even with the little joke that you made, kind of talked about it in like a non-zero sum, because you're going to accept the compliment, but I'm giving compliments at the same time. Like all of that goes into like the way that you conduct conversation.
Well, and that's actually sort of here in the heart of then the place in the field note where it can all fall apart. So if you say, hey, it's great to have different ideas, then the question is, how do you keep personality, motives, individuals out of it as opposed to the ideas, right? So when you're disagreeing, it's not like I'm condemning you. I mean, I'm obviously condemning the sort of superficial nature of your thought. But other than that, I'm not condemning you. And so that's where most people have a hard time, right? Because personality is going to get involved and you still have actual human beings. And so then all of a sudden, you have sort of emotional reactions. So you can't, so this is the tricky part, because you can't fill the entire room with Vulcans, right? You can't do it. And so that's the real problem. But you can learn, and I think we have a lot of these behaviors in admired leadership, but the idea is, can you begin to have an approach where if you start to see that happening, if you as the leader, the team leader, the dialogue leader, if you see people sort of breaking into that or into factions within groups, you say, well, let's bring it back to the strategy. Let's bring it back to the issue or the data, whatever that is, right? And I think that's the important part.
Yeah, but it also can go to the way that you set up the conversation in the first place. If you're recognizing where the conflict aversion, where the zero sum aversion is going to come from in that, even in the way that you send out the email, can be like, we're going to be discussing a few topics on the merger that's taking place. You could say at the top of our agenda is a subject that happens to be a zero sum subject, or you can say at the top of your agenda is a subject that is a non-zero sum agenda. And people are going to come to it with a lot more excitement and ready to go and ready to talk if you're leading with the idea that they're non-zero sum talk. So for instance, if you're talking through a merger, the zero sum part of it is like resource allocation, because we all know there's a finite budget. So we're talking about potential layoffs. We're talking about duplicates. No one wants to be involved with that level of the conversation, unless they're a bit sociopathic, right? Would they choose that? But when you're talking about integrating workflow, which is the non-zero sum part of, integrating two offices that are now merging, then people are going to be more willing to talk about that. So if you're going to have both of those subjects on the agenda, perhaps that you should lead with the non-zero sum one in the way you're talking about it instead of the zero sum one, because people are going to be naturally more increased with that. Their distrust is going to be raised. Their ire is going to be raised. Their aggressiveness is going to be raised when they know that they're going to have to come into this discussion where they have to protect their own job. Right?
Yeah, right. So, well, and that's the thing when stuff's on the line or at stake. And I think when you go back 35 years, you go back to Covey's book, the idea, when the buzzword of the time, and then it lingered, win-win. The idea was that could we be in a process where there's a negotiation where it's not that you win or I win, because you can't really be in a win-lose relationship or marriage, partnership for very long, or no deal. Right? That you say, it's not like, and no deal. It's like, well, all right, we're not going to come to terms on this. Now, that's different than working inside the same team, right? Yes. Where you're kind of working for the same. I mean, I understand it's not a negotiation like buying a car. In a marriage, you should be working toward the same team. Now, we had a conflict the other night. My youngest still lives at home, which she needs to do because she's 11. But
well,
which is a good
debatable,
yeah, right? Yeah, and so I had set up with you're always telling stories that indict your behavior as a husband. So I'm just joking. But so I had suggested a movie that we could watch, and I came back into the family room, and my wife suggested something else. And I didn't think that my reaction was particularly provocative.
Yes.
Apparently, my facial expression might have indicated a great deal of non-family harmony directions.
Right.
And so not a good idea on New Year's Eve. And I actually, part of my thing, this is where everybody watching will be on my side, because I knew that she was saying this on behalf of my daughter, who I think would have gone with my first choice anyway. And my wife, I knew, doesn't like the people in the thing that she suggested. So I knew she was going to have a bad time watching the thing that she was suggesting, whereas I knew that if we watched the thing that I picked, that we'd all have a good time.
Right.
And ultimately, we actually did watch my selection, and everybody had a good time. But I still got in trouble for that, right?
Yeah.
Now, I thought I was doing the right thing. To be like, no, we don't have to watch that thing that I know you're going to hate. Right? Now, did I put this field note into a good operating mechanism? I'm not so sure, right? But I was trying to go in that direction. Now, can you keep, and I think this is the trick, which is, can you keep the personality part to a minimum? And I'm not positive, because the field note is saying that, like in you, and I think you can. I don't think you have to go for 100%. That's where I would wonder how this all worked out in the camp.
Right.
Because again, you can't populate the room with Vulcans, nor should you. The fact that you have human beings involved is actually what's going to make it a great project in the first place. So you do have to have some breathing room here, right? There's going to be moments where there's some sort of frayed tensions and emotional edges. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, it is. But if you've got a framework that recognizes, we can step back and we can allow ourselves to talk about ideas, and even just naming it out loud, saying, I know that, we all have emotions in the room. That framework is a fine thing to include in the way that you're doing it. But the real key is to kind of set up the ground rules. It was interesting. Forgive me for bringing up the study once again, but the feedback on it that I was thinking as I was reading is like, why are sports so popular? Because most of the sporting events that we observe and get really are zero-sum opportunity. And this study went on to say that zero-sum sports, because there's some non-zero-sum sports like that are individually, right? CrossFit is a good example of that. Like you're really just competing against yourself. But CrossFit will even take some zero-sum opportunity once a year to like declare a winner and losers, right? But you don't even focus on that. But the trick is with sports is that you've got all of the real world conflict moderated by officials who are enforcing rules in such a way that kind of eliminate like some of that icky conflict that people would naturally feel. And so that's the point here in the field note as well, is like come up with a situation where the ground rules are being the things that you can all turn and yell at the refs whenever you want, right? But create a situation where something else gets the ire instead of the person on the other side of the aisle.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, look, and as you were talking about sports, it reminded me that earlier today I read in the New York Times today, so this you could be worth looking up. Interesting article on Carly Ursay-Gordon, the woman who now runs the Indianapolis Colts, right? Her father died. She and her sisters own the team, but she's been the one for 20 years. And on the sideline, she wears the headset and she writes notes and she's very data driven. And it talks about in that article moments of real conflict, like with coaches and other folks, and one where the coach like texted her like this profanity laden sort of tirade, and then she came into his office I think the next day, and he was like, you should probably fire me. And she's like, no, not at all. I want your feedback. But she's known for being very data driven. Like, let's take the facts, let's get to the reason judgment. And there's nothing that's more sort of, and if you watch like, any of the behind the scenes shows on HBO and whatnot on football teams, they could talk about data driven, but this is a loose collection of very passionate people that kind of, it's like, how did the Anthony Bourdain described, kitchen crews as pirate ships, right? They're like sort of, all right, it's kind of a little crazy back there. Like you're in this nice restaurant. Probably a bit the same if you got inside an NFL, and you've been in more NFL locker rooms, than I have. But I think you have to, all I'm saying at the end of this is have a team that can lean into the conflict and actually embrace a little bit of the humanity of it. Don't be so afraid of it. And you're actually going to probably do fine. That's
great.
It.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks for this conversation. We'll talk again tomorrow.
See you.
Bye now.